Welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Zach Rollins. He's a graduate of Rhode Island. Is it University of Rhode Island or Rhode Island University?
University of Rhode Island, yeah.
He's a boat captain, weightlifter, and hosts the podcast Along the Keel. Thanks for being on here, Zach.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff. Pleasure to be here.
It's 5 a.m. Alaska time, so if I fumble over the words a little bit, I usually wake up at 5, but there's a difference between waking up at 5 and being able to communicate and create thoughts and sentences. So
definitely. I appreciate being up early.
Yeah, it's fun. You have to get up early. You got to attack the day. Otherwise, you just lay around and you kind of let it happen to you, and that's no good.
Yep.
So you have your job, you have your podcast, you have an affiliation with Chasing Tides and Waypoint. So how do you divide all your attention or your time between these 4 things? If you could briefly talk about what those 4 things are, then we'll get rolling.
Yeah. So, as you said, I work as a boat captain full-time. So that's my full-time job. And fortunately, the job that I have is with a towing and salvage company. So what we do is, if you kind of look at it as AAA on the water, but with a little bit more danger here and there. And it kind of goes where if you broke down offshore, and I know you have a boat, Jeff, so you're familiar with, being out on the water, you need a battery jump, you ran out of fuel, all of a sudden you hit a rock or something, we'll come get you. We'll come help you out. Now, then the other half is, okay, well, there's some people in distress, and that distress turns into a boat that capsizes, and then we can salvage that vessel once everyone is safe and kind of just remove that vessel from the waterway, hazard of navigation, environmental disaster, and prevent those things. So it's a fun job. You kind of have to balance a lot of things when you're out there. You always kind of have to be on your toes and think a little bit differently and be quick to solve problems. Let's see, last weekend, we pulled 6 people out of the water, a boat capsized. I didn't pull any people out of the water. I kind of responded and we did the salvage. But the other guy who was on the water did. So you got some opportunity to do some cool things when out on the water. Then there's Along the Keel, which is the podcast, which I started about 1.5 years ago. Roughly 1 year and some months ago. And that's been great. It's been able to, it's all about teaching people how to love the ocean, teach people how to love the outdoors, but kind of incorporating conscious capitalism into that. And what I do is I interview entrepreneurs, innovators in the outdoors to kind of get the backstory behind both and probably some that you've never heard of, so it's kind of a cool way to connect with entrepreneurs. I tend to have some tendencies like that. So it's just cool to be able to kind of see under the hood of these companies and brands that I always love and admire. And then let's see, Waypoint. So after having the podcast and being affiliated with Waypoint, just similar to the Mediocre Alaskan, it actually turned into kind of like this little side gig where I'm helping kind of grow the network and bring on guys like you, Jeff, and some other podcasts and growing it that way. So yeah, there's definitely quite a few irons in the fire, one would say, but I think balance comes where the word balance would be kind of a understatement because there really is no balance. It's just kind of working through the day and solving the problems that come up. And I think through that, fortunately, the jobs that I have, I can kind of be all in one place at one time, whether it's on my computer or when I'm on the boat, when I'm not having to do a call, I can work on my laptop and kind of get things done. So there is some method to the madness.
As far as that job goes, are you affiliated with the state, the Coast Guard? It seems like do you work in any sort of partnership, or is it totally independent?
So we don't work with, we're not in a partnership with them. But we do work alongside government agencies quite a bit, because a lot of the times, let's say, similar to the example that I gave earlier, where, we'll get called to the scene or we'll respond to a scene and the Coast Guard, will aid them if need be. But I think that's more of just being a good Samaritan and being in the maritime world. Fortunately, we have the capability to kind of be a step above some recreational boaters. So we have some knowledge so we can kind of aid the Coast Guard and help them with our expertise. And then a lot of the times agencies will call us to be like, that needs some help, but it's outside of our jurisdiction and capabilities. Can you guys do that? By no means are we rescuing people. We will if we have to, but at the same time, we're here to kind of be AAA on the water, if you will.
Nice. Yeah. That's nice. I'm kind of surprised that doesn't exist in more places, or maybe it does. I just live in Southeast Alaska and things look different, but yeah, the coasties are the ones that step in if need be, but there's kind of a love-hate because you've got them coming out and checking your boat for flares and life jackets and things like that, during a perfect changing tide. So you're trying to fish for king salmon and then they come over. It's great that they're there and do their job, because, you complain about those sort of services until you need it. Then all of a sudden it's, right. Oh my gosh, thank you for being there.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's cool. So as far as the entrepreneurial world goes, there's a lot of people who are trying to take, like there's a certain amount of the pie and they're trying to take their own pie rather than create more to the pie and make the pie bigger. Mm-hmm. So how do you see the difference between an entrepreneurial that's trying to take and something that's trying to build value? And what's kind of your philosophy, I guess, going making sure that you're providing value to people rather than just trying to take money from them?
Yeah, that's an interesting, I love that question, because, that's kind of capitalism, right? It's like, okay, we got these two entities, these two people, and, one is the consumer and one is the producer. And a lot of the times I think the producer tends to just see that consumer as a consumer, right? They're just simply dollars and cents. And I think nowadays, a lot of the times companies are starting to realize that the consumer wants to be, they want to have more of an experience. They want to have more of a story to go along with it. So I think for me, what I create value is, number one, be authentic, right? So be authentic to you, be authentic to what you're trying to produce and believe in. And for me, that's always kind of been the ocean and the water. And I've always kind of had this mantra of like, all right, what am I doing? I'm teaching people how to love the ocean. And that kind of came to me when I was working in Hawaii. I was my day off. I was swimming with sea turtles, which was awesome. Like, who doesn't want to do that? And it kind of hit me. I was like, man, I'm out here. I get to take people out chartering every day. And what am I doing like at my core? And that, for me, that's kind of been the value that I've always tried to bring to the table, whether it's teach people how to drive boats, talking to entrepreneurs and seeing how they're doing things and trying to create value for them, whether it's additional marketing, ability to sell their product, and then just being able to connect them with a like-minded consumer. So I think you got to continue to just constantly create value, but at your core, be authentic to it. Like I listened to your podcast with Danny, the founder of Caffeine and Kilos. I actually listened to all three of them. It was three of them that he's on.
Three of them.
Yeah. Great guy. And his come up was, everything was very authentic. It was very true to who he was, and you can tell, like I signed up for his newsletter now, and it stays true throughout whatever he does, right? You can really hear his voice. So creating value as an entrepreneur. And, I don't know if I even consider myself as an entrepreneur yet. So
I think at some point same thing with writing. I wrote a couple articles and then I started writing a column for a newspaper, but still I was hesitant to call myself a writer just because it seems in order to achieve that level, you have to have so much more. Mm-hmm. I think we do sell ourselves short sometimes. And I think sometimes once we take ownership of things, then we can give ourselves permission to learn and grow. It's funny when I think back to teaching with Danny, when I'd go visit his class when he was teaching PE, and it was Danny, totally Danny. And you just think now, like, man, those kids who had Danny Lear as a teacher, like you got a lot of stuff for free. Like now he does speaking engagements, things like that. Like you had this as your teacher, and a lot of the kids did gravitate to him. But when you're freshman PE class and this guy is yelling around being crazy, that's a little different.
Yeah.
So how do you know how to trust in the game? Because sometimes your entrepreneur types can be really excited and they can have a lot of ideas, but not necessarily follow through. You and I talked about that Wayne's World example where, their show is great. People like it. And then you have this producer that comes in to exploit it. So how do you know who to trust and find that authenticity?
Whew, man, that's a good question. I think a lot of that comes with trial and error, and being able to see someone else's value in what they are trying to achieve and try and align it with yourself. I think, so I do a lot of weightlifting too. And the club that I'm at, Providence Barbell Club, a lot of the values that they have, I have, and being able to trust them to be, hey, if you want to get strong, you gotta come here and put in the work. But it's having that trust, that underlying trust of that they're going to do their job and I'm going to do my job, and we're going to kind of meet in the middle and have a grand old time, So I think with any relationship, having that trust and the ability to say, okay, these people are doing their thing, I'm doing my thing, let's meet in the middle. But, for me, I got kind of thrust into this whole world and this mindset from a guy named John. And John has a coffee company here in Rhode Island. And I've always been picking his brain. He was actually a coach of mine. He coached me when I was doing CrossFit and in high school. And I always kind of gravitated to him because he was kind of a quiet guy. He kind of kept to himself. He was in the corner. And as much as I am somewhat of an extrovert, I think I'm deep down inside really big, just an introvert. I kind of keep to myself at times. And, all of a sudden John would drive up and he went from like this random Jeep, like an old TJ, to a brand new BMW. I'm like, that's interesting. Like here's this guy, he's really quiet and I'm not, BMW, like whatever you want to drive. But it was just interesting. And through conversations, I would learn more about what John did and knowing that there was always something else that he had going on, in the background. So, when I went to school to the University of Rhode Island, he actually lived at the top of campus and we kept in really good contact. We always kept in touch and I would always kind of bounce ideas off of him. And I began to, really trust the guy and he would kind of take me under his wing and answer those questions kind of whenever. And when he started his coffee company, we would literally go up in his living room and pick and pack beans in his living room till 1 a.m. in the morning. And that's what I did on my Friday night. Like I would go up to his house and we'd pick and pack beans and I would smell like coffee by the end of the night. And, when you're roasting coffee for 3 hours, coffee doesn't smell good anymore. It just, and it sticks to you. So, I think building relationships and just over time, and just picking people's brains and seeing what they're about and what their true character is, I think is super important. Yeah.
I think that's with anything, that smell. When you work at a pizza place when you're in high school, oh man, I don't want this job. This is a job.
This sucks.
Is a career. I do not like pizza. I'm sure same thing. I was looking at a couple of pictures of where you work at. You say Providence Barbell Club. Is that the name?
Yep. Providence Barbell Club. Mm-hmm.
And it's got this old brick look to it. It just made me think like it was some old whaling shed or something like that. What's the history of that building? Because that wasn't built 15 years ago.
No, that building was built in the early, I want to say late 1800s and early 1900s. So Rhode Island has historically been known for its textiles. And, if you go up to Providence, you'll see remnants of the history of Rhode Island everywhere, from, some of the streets to, the beautiful textile buildings. And a lot of these textile buildings have been refurbished and a lot of them made into condos for some reason. And, on top of that, Providence Barbell room of a CrossFit gym for a long time. That's where I started. And then they moved to this textile building and it's a damn cool place. I'll tell you that. It's just the brick, the lighting, it's probably the coolest barbell club in the country in terms of location, in terms of a lot of things, but the location is pretty badass.
Yeah. The East Coast history is so much different than like everywhere has history. It all has the exact same amount of history, but as far as like what was built, what remains, the relics, the specific things, people, that's the only variance that you have. When I was back East a couple of times, I worked in DC for a couple of summers and my brother went to George Washington.
Okay.
it's just so different being back there. Different climate, different people, different attitude. But just seeing those older buildings and just seeing some of that history. What are some of the cool things to see in Rhode Island?
Oh man, Rhode Island's a cool state, and it's funny because everyone says I got to get out of Rhode Island. I got to get out of Rhode Island. And having been born in California, lived in Florida, moved to Rhode Island, moved back to Rhode Island, lived in Hawaii, like lived a little bit everywhere and done quite a bit of road trips and just backpacking and across the United States, which the United States is awesome. Like people always want to go to Europe for some reason, but I'm like, man, you guys gotta play in your own backyard a little bit before you go out in the front. Yeah. But yeah, Rhode Island's cool. Narragansett Bay, in my opinion, and the Rhode Island Sound, and just here between Massachusetts, out there on the water is probably some of the best boating in the U.S. I mean, you can jump from island to island. You can have lunch on Martha's Vineyard, shoot over to Nantucket for coffee, and then go to Block Island for dinner all in one day. And it's beautiful. You know, the scenery is beautiful. The coastline has awesome beaches with, you know, depending on where you are, like you go a little bit south, beaches are nice and flat and sandy. You go a little bit north, it's you know, rocky and jagged with cliffs. It's everywhere is cool. I mean, there's no bad spot unless you want to go to Woonsocket, and no one likes Woonsocket.
Why is that?
It's just like a old textile town that has stayed an old textile town and hasn't been beautiful, you know, I guess gentrified or, you know, made beautiful in any way. Just a lot of, yeah.
So you say it's beautiful, and if that's kind of the stereotype, or if that's what draws people, is it possible at all to get away from the crowds, or is it just a mess of people all trying to do the same thing?
No, I think, you know, for some reason, people don't take advantage of what's in Rhode Island. I don't know what it is. It's, you know, people from out of state, from New York, New Jersey. Like if you go down here during the summer to Narragansett Beach or any of the main beaches, you always see out of state plates. And you see a lot of other in-state plates, but, you know, I don't think people really realize what they have in their backyard. And they're always trying to go elsewhere, you know, but summer here is awesome. Winter kind of sucks because there's nothing to do. But you know, you kind of got to earn your summer anyway. So, yeah. I
think that's one of our human flaws, is that we get really proficient at repeating or regurgitating the brochure. When it comes time to actually doing it, you know, we don't. And at first we want to get out, and then, well, we end up not getting out, or, you know, there's just that difference. I think Ketchikan's like that too. You would think that anybody that lives on an island in Southeast Alaska and endures all the rain and the darkness and the cold, it would just be out every opportunity. And there's a lot of people that do that, but you still have a contingent of the population that just doesn't really do much. They say that Ketchikan's great because you can hike and you can fish and you can hunt, but then they don't do it. You know, there's that difference between actively living the brochure and just being able to repeat it to others.
I love that analogy that you made, you know, living in the brochure and just kind of being like, yeah, you should go here. Have you been there? No, I've never been there. It's like, well, then how are you in any way someone that I should listen to when you say, you know, that I should go there?
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
Yeah, but I think that's a lot of things. You know, people always want to live vicariously through others and not actually take the step to do it themselves. You know, and I think that's just a lack of willing to ask questions. You know, be curious, be insightful, and kind of take that leap with a little bit of confidence behind you. And if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But having the ability to be like, okay, well, I'm going to try it. And if it doesn't work, then that sucks. But if it does, then it'd be great, you know? And, you know, even just a new activity, like a lot of people always ask like, oh, where should I go? Where should I go explore? Where should I go hiking? It's like, go down to, you got Google, you got on, you can figure it out. You know, I mean, I don't know every hiking spot in the state, but the internet works and you can figure it out, you know? So I think, you know, I love that analogy, living through the brochure. I don't know. I don't know how people are going to kind of overcome that. Do you have any insight on that? I mean, you're a teacher, so you're someone that's always around kids that are like, you know, kind of going through that weird part in life where you're going to college, you're not going to college, you're going to get a job. You know, what are you going to do? You're going to go backpacking. Like, what's your answer to that?
I usually like to ask the question. That way I can just absorb other people's insight. I think that's just, you know, if someone could really figure it out, then it would be huge, or it probably actually is already huge, because the self-help or the personal growth industry is a multi-billion-dollar, probably billion-dollar at this point, industry of just how do you get people to live life a little better and see a positive attitude or see opportunities everywhere rather than other things. But, you know, again, we just, you know, just because you buy the book doesn't mean it's going to change your life. You actually have to do it. You have to show up. You get your gym membership. You have to show up. You buy stuff for home, you still actually have to do it. So after teaching for a while, you start to see certain attributes in kids. We have a former student who was on Outer Banks, the show that's on Netflix.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So Rudy Pankow, I don't know which one he plays. Something with a J, I think. I don't know. But, you know, he's in Hollywood now, and he's on this popular Netflix show, and they're going to get a second season. And so I look back at him in high school, and he charismatic, but just a genuine nice kid. And he was a hard worker. You know, he wasn't the 4.0 kid that didn't have to try at all. And so that, you know, when you hear the story about him washing dishes at a cheesecake factory on the night shift, you know, and just barely scraping by, that just makes sense that he had that work ethic to be able to make it work. He wasn't the type of kid who was going to, you know, oh, this is a difficult assignment. I don't want to do this assignment. I'm going to cheat, or I'm going to, you know, fall away as soon as it becomes difficult. So you see examples like that. And then it doesn't have to be even Hollywood. It can just be a kid who's, you know, owns a business or is just happy, you know?
That's a big one right there.
Yeah. I had a kid who was working. He had all of his certifications to work at the shipyard here. And that's what he loved to do. He loved to weld. And he's like, Mr. Lund, I'm thinking about dropping out of high school because I can get 40 hours a week. And so with school, I can't get 40 hours a week right now. So I could start working full time right now, or I can waste the next 2.5 months in school. I said, well, you do have a plan. Like that's a pretty solid reason. However, I don't know of anyone who has ever been happy that they dropped out of high school.
Right.
So he stuck with it for an extra 2.5 months. And I see him at the store sometimes and he's just happy. You know, he just, I say, hey man, how's it going? He says good. And he's loving the job and girlfriend and, you know, just happy, content. You know, he didn't want to leave. He wasn't curious about the rest of the world, and that's totally fine. And just, he was the kid who hated science fiction, but loved discussing stuff. So like, just, so you see a lot of that, just that curiosity. And then other kids you just feel don't really have it yet. And you wonder what you can say to kind of get them to engage, to check in. To be the hard worker that's going to achieve like their dreams, or be the person who's just, I'm happy, I'm secure, and this is what I want to do. And I think that's just kind of the daily conversation, or, you know, teacher philosophy. Like, how can I get these kids to think about that? And then maybe change, maybe figure it out later. Cause that's, the last thing you want to see is a kid who grew up to be an adult and just life is beating them down. You hate
right.
to see that. But.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was going through, you posted something on your Instagram story the other night or the other day, and I screenshotted it. And it was so reminiscent because, when I was in high school, I was never really someone that enjoyed school. I was okay. It was something that I was like, all right, I got to do this thing because I have to do it. And, I'm going to get through it. But I was always busy doing other things outside of school, whether it was competing in CrossFit or weightlifting or, trying to start something up. And, I had a lot of teachers in high school, and that were, in a lot of ways, they understood that. And I think you're one of those guys. And that's why I screenshot it. You said, let's see, it's on the whiteboard, and some student wrote, Lund, the only teacher to make me want to read a book without a grade. That sums it up right there, man. I love that.
That was a senior this year who, it was for adventure literature. So anytime that you're taking a class like Adventure Lit and you're reading, Into the Wild, Into Thin Air, those sort of books, which really is nice that we match kind of that English class with interests of the kids. You can take science fiction lit, you can take adventure lit, mythology. I think that's really
awesome.
helps. So it's not just junior year out of a textbook, senior year out of a textbook. So I think that's really huge. So I can really be excited about that class, which then, helps create a different environment. But I can't remember which book it was, but I say, dude, read this book. And it was a good one.
Was it your book?
No. I'm too shy, embarrassed, bad at taking compliments for kids. I had a kid come by the school and wanted it autographed, and I was like, oh, this is so weird and awkward. I feel so uncomfortable right now. But I actually kind of hope that they don't read it. Like, you can buy it, that's fine. I want that.
I'll take your money, but just don't read it.
Yeah, I don't want to hear about like the comma that I have missing, or I had the wrong word there, and that just. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's part of that fear thing too. Anytime that you create, is it going to be good enough? Your first podcast is going to be terrible. Your fifth podcast, maybe a little bit better, but maybe even get worse. Do you look back at some of your podcasts and think, oh gosh, what am I doing?
Oh God. Yeah. I was having this conversation with someone else the other day, and, it's all an evolution, right? The first moment when you start a podcast, it's going to suck, like it, relative, right? It might, someone that's extremely well spoken and has been doing, speeches for their entire lives. Maybe they're a motivational speaker and they start a podcast. Well, yeah, the first one, they probably got some, they got some experience in the book, right? Whereas me, or, someone that has never really done any of that, they start a podcast and it's all figuring it out. What questions do I ask? Do I just have a conversation? Do I not? Do I stage it? How do I want to structure it? And the first one is rocky and rough, and there's probably a lot of blank silence and staring at one another. But then, by 20 and 30, you're like kind of picking up steam. And then all of a sudden you hit 50 and 60, you're like, okay, I can kind of do this in my sleep a little bit. And then I'm at like 70 maybe coming up. I got a bunch recorded. They just haven't launched yet. So by that time you're like, okay, I kind of got it, but I know down the road when I hit episode 200, I'm going to look back at 70 and be like, wow, that guy was an idiot. Like, why was he talking like that? So I think it's all an evolution. So and I totally agree with the whole, having a doubt of, having that self-doubt of like, oh, is it going to be good enough? Is it not? Am I saying my ums too many times? Did I say like too many times? Even that, just having the pause and saying, right. It's a constant evolution, but I think you got to just keep recognizing those moments and just trying to make them better and better every single time, and that's what it is for me, at least. Yeah.
I think at some point too, with anything, understanding that what you're creating has value, and it can be at some point you're giving away something that has value, and you're giving it away for free. I have a couple of buddies who like to write and they want to start getting published. And I said, you got to know and trust that you are good enough to be published and get paid for it. There's always people who are looking to take stuff and get stuff for free. I had one magazine I submitted an article to, and this was after 10 years of freelance writing. And I said, this is a submission. I'm a freelance writer, so all the things that would indicate that I'm expecting to get paid. And then 6 months later, I emailed. I said, I almost forgot that I sent them a letter and a column. And I said, just want to check up on this, see if you used it. And they said, oh, yeah, we used that 6 months ago. It was in our guest story section. And so they hadn't told me that they published it. And B, they put it in their guest story section so they didn't have to pay. It's, for the people who were just so happy to have it in the magazine that there was no pay for it. So I thought, man, that is jacked up. But that's kind of, to fit the margin or whatever, they have to get as much content as possible that's good content, and then maybe not pay for it or pay as much. And I thought, man, that's messed up. I don't want to sound like an entitled brat or anything, but I know what I'm doing, and I know that this is worth something. I don't need a whole lot of money, but just compensate for the work that I put in.
Right.
I think that can be a difficult thing. People asking or people saying, I'm putting in time. There's money invested in this for equipment, for gear, for time. This is worth, getting paid for. This is something.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely it's a hard pill to swallow, especially when you're getting started and you're putting a lot of time into things. You're putting a lot of energy into things. And with a podcast, like podcasts are notorious for not making a lot of money, right? I mean, we all know that when you get into it, you're not going to make it rich if that's the goal, right? Off of just the podcast, like just talking to a microphone. Very few, like everyone's like, well, Joe Rogan can do it. And I'm like, yeah, but that's one guy. That's one dude, lately I've put a lot of thought into, everyone wants to get all hot and bothered about seeing this one person online do something great and do something where they're making lots of money. And I think to myself, I'm like, yeah, that's one person, right? There's a lot of other people that are doing the same thing, but just don't show it, right? They're not showing it up there, but they have a lot of value too. And I think that's the thing is like, as long as you're creating value, it all comes back around, as long as you just keep creating value, you keep being consistent and you keep showing up and being authentic to you. In the end, you're going to win in whichever way it is. And there's going to be small wins along the way. And there's going to be some big losses and small losses along the way too. But, it's cool because I know I've had people love the show, love what you're doing. Like, keep going. I'm a fan. And those usually happen on the days that are really, really not having, like, I'm not having fun, I'm sure you've had that where you walk into your classroom and you're just not having a good day just because we're human. We don't have every day is not sunshine and rainbows. And, a student comes up to you and he writes that on your board, what we said earlier. And you're like, all right, I guess I'll keep going,
Yeah.
It's like, all right, I guess I can keep going. Like, how hard can it be? And it's those little moments that that you're creating value, and it just hasn't panned out just yet. But if we keep at it, we stay consistent, then I think it'll all come back around.
Yeah. The thing about Rogan's podcast is he's actually an incredible journalist as far as the skill of asking questions, listening and then asking questions, and then not letting anybody get off with some sort of, prepackaged or whatever response. And that's something that we're kind of lacking in the media. I think a lot of people, when they are going to do interviews, they do them under certain conditions. Where let me get the questions first and this and that. It goes through the PR person. So that's what makes it so interesting. Every episode, you're going to have conversations of people who are thinking. It's not just someone telling stories.
Right. Yeah.
Some of those podcasts I like to listen to because it's an interesting story, but there has to be something you can glean from it. If it's just you telling a story, then the purpose of this podcast is for more people to hear your story.
Right.
You try to make the story sound epic or hashtag full send, and it just isn't. It's just you went out there and you shot something, or you caught a fish. It's awesome, and you're trying to make a 30-pound fish sound like a 300-pound fish, and it's cool. It's a great story, but if people weren't there and there's nothing you can kind of take from it, then I don't know. Sometimes those fall flat. Sometimes if you have a great storyteller, they could tell a story about catching a minnow and it's going to be funny. So
yeah. I totally agree. You can make any story interesting and awesome. And it's those interviews that, they want you to submit questions. I've had a few companies reach out and they're like, "Hey, can we be on your show?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Awesome. Like, day and time, let me know." And they're like, "Well, don't you have a media kit and submitting questions and all this other stuff?" I'm like, "No." And I almost don't want to do it. Like, I'm like, that sounds like a lot of unnecessary work when I know that I'm just going to have a conversation with you. And that's all I want. Like, if you truly want to know my style, go back and listen to an episode or two and you'll figure it out. Like the podcast that I listened of yours most recently was the woman who went bear hunting with her dad.
The bison hunt?
The bison hunt. I'm sorry, bison hunt.
Yeah.
That was awesome. That was epic. And she was so cool, in the way she described everything and kind of the trials and tribulations of trying to get that bison, and it really put me in the place where I hiked Mount Adams with my best friend and a few other friends on his birthday in the middle of the winter. And there was like 4 feet of freshly fallen snow on this mountain. So we started out with snowshoes. And as you said in the podcast, in your podcast, you're like, snowshoes suck.
Yeah,
they do suck. They're absolutely terrible. But they give you a good leg workout. Yeah. But they'll destroy you by the end of the day. But that whole story was so relatable, of just trying to be consistent, really trying to, okay, we're gonna get this bison. That's not the right shot. We have to go ski over here. And then we see this bison, but it got scared away by the glare in our sunglasses. And this whole story kind of played out. And I thought you did a really nice job with it. And I think that's a testament to just being curious. That's another thing the guy, Cody
Rich,
he brought up. Just be curious, ask questions. Like, that's what makes a good story.
Yeah.
Not this whole.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, not this whole like planned out thing. You know?
If you have a couple of questions to start at the beginning to kind of prime the engine, make sure you cover certain things and then just kind of go from there. But, just that listening, it's going to sound a lot better than if you have 15 questions, because then there's no tangents, see where it goes and talk to a person. So yeah, I liked her telling that story because there were so many other things that were embedded in it. It was the hunt with her boyfriend. It was the hunt with her dad. Mm-hmm. It was just kind of that Alaska lifestyle. And it's not like a super huge deal. She didn't have to be convinced to go out on a bison hunt. Like, she was excited, and like her she worked with and that's just kind of a lot of Alaska attitude. You have a lot of people in Alaska who just, kind of hang out and go to the bar in the afternoon, evenings, on the weekends, and, just kind of do that. But you also have the people just, like I said, live the brochure, and that was pretty fun to talk to those people and remind you of what you should be doing too.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Alaska is one state that I got to get out to eventually. It's on the bucket list. I've done almost every state within the continental US. I think I got like 8 left to go, but Alaska is definitely like top on the list to go check out.
Do you have things that you look for when you go to a new state? Is it, I want to see the touristy stuff and then get right off the beaten path? What do you approach with?
My approach has always been, and a lot of these have been done on the road. I think the best way to travel is, behind a windshield. It's you get to see things that you're not going to see by taking a plane. And I think everyone knows that, but it's the people that actually go and do it, like we said earlier, and being willing to sit on, in a car in South Dakota and see nothing but grass for 6 hours. But then all of a sudden the Badlands just emerge from the landscape, and you're just kind of enamored by how they just pop up like that, and you can kind of see that the local population working, just out tending cattle and the sheepdogs herding them around, and the guys in the ATVs and the cowboys with the cowboy hats, and like all that adds to the narrative of going to whatever state you're in. Like, you would be doing yourself an injustice if you came to Rhode Island and you didn't go down to Galilee and check out the fishing boats. Like, that's such an integral part of the culture here in Rhode Island that it plays so well into the narrative. And if you just showed up to Providence and walked around, like maybe the city is your thing, but you're missing out on so much other value here in the state, you know? Because for me, I always kind of want to see like soup to nuts. Like I want to go to a ranch and then I want to go eat a nice steak in the city, you know, like, cause that you kind of put this whole story together. You're like, okay, this guy he's out there working, busting his ass, herding his cattle. Then they go to slaughter. And then all of a sudden it ends up on your plate, you know? And I think that's been my approach when I can. I mean, obviously like not every trip can be like that. You know, like I recently did a competition in Utah, but we kind of stayed within Utah, like Salt Lake City. And that was a very different trip because I was there for a purpose. But if I'm just going to a state to check it out, yeah, I typically start with the more, I guess, off the beaten path stuff and then work my way in, because by that time you got to get to the airport anyway. You're already typically all the tourist stuff is closer to the airport. Right. But yeah, tourist stuff is great, but it's not the highlight. The highlight is going for that hike and seeing the beautiful landscape. And then also appreciating like, you know, okay, I went to Waikiki Beach. Cool. Check the box, you know, but did I go, you know, to Hana Road in Maui and do the whole drive and do the lookouts and hike and whatnot? That's not checking the box. That's experiencing it, you know? So I guess that's kind of been my approach to travel so far.
I think I've gone from a go to see the stuff to a more experiencing things. So like if Instagram is a small representation of your life, is most of your Instagram feed just you standing in certain places or walking, hiking, you know, being active. So when I go to like a Wyoming, I want to fish there, but then I also want to see kind of what it's known for as well. See some of that history and imagine what it would have been like to go across that in a wagon. That's kind of my first judge is, all right, what can I fish, where, and how can I make that happen? But I don't want to leave without experiencing some of the culture. I think that's one of the biggest things that people miss out when they come to Ketchikan is, or, you know, come down here to fish or hunt, is they fly in and then they fly out somewhere else. And so they only meet the lodge employees, or they only meet the bush pilot that flies them out to a lake to hunt. And they don't meet any of the people who call this place home. You know, it's kind of like what type of person lives in Wyoming and stays, and what type of person stays in New Mexico? Like, what is it how can you live in Oklahoma? You know? And so you meet that person, you see, oh, this person is happy and content because they don't have the stuff that I think might be valuable, but maybe it's because it's actually not that valuable. So you can kind of get an essentialism sort of look at things and see why people can be happy and content. And I think meeting those people is just as important as seeing the history. Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. One of my favorite states so far has been Montana. And it's not so much, I mean, Montana is gorgeous, but the people there, I just love them. I think they're so, the first word that comes to my mind, I just think they're so funny in the sense that they're just these rugged bunch of people that really don't care what's happening in the outside world. And they're just, I'm going to go hunt, I'm going to go hike, and I'm going to go get stuff done. And I just like that attitude. You know, you got to earn it mentality, you know, but I think that also plays into like you going fishing in Wyoming. You got to earn that. Like you got to put in the experience beforehand to know what you're doing. And then you got to go catch the fish, whether maybe it's on like a long distance hike to go find that brook or stream. And that's truly experiencing Wyoming versus going to the aquarium. You know, you can go to an aquarium in any state. Sure. They might have some different fish, but you know, what's really the difference here versus what you did? You know, it's a totally different experience. You know?
When my fiance and I were in Cape Cod this last summer, we were fishing for striper, and I'm the person who wants to go there and on day 1 or 2 get a guide because you can just expedite the process. And I think you were talking about it on one of your episodes, recent history.
Yeah.
Just you learn so much about how to fish the area that you wouldn't know otherwise. So you can do it yourself and you can save $500, $600, but then your experience is all, you know, casting. Maybe you don't get anything. So how much you want to invest in the experience so that day 1 is with the guide, you learn stuff. And then day 2, 3, or however many days you're there, be much more efficient. Otherwise it can be 3 or 4 days of frustration. But I had thought about that, just casting all day, and only had one little striper that kind of followed in and then just swam off. So it was fun. I mean, it was cheap. Didn't spend any money, but I just kind of wonder, I could have made that experience better or more. But at the same time, you don't want to just throw money everywhere. And then kind of that balance of, I've earned this, I deserve this. And so, to throw all monetary or financial caution to the wind and just get guides everywhere. And that's unsustainable.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it all depends on the guide, the trip, right? I mean, some guides are really into just teaching you how to fish and being an actual guide, right? And I had this conversation with Tom Rowland, who was recently on an episode, and I actually started writing come out a little bit later, and it's all about just being a guide and being that teacher, and how, even though you're a fishing guide, you're teaching someone, in whatever capacity you want to teach. But then you have these other guys who just kind of see it as, dollars and cents. Okay, another guest on the boat, catch them a couple fish, keep going. But typically those guys aren't going to have that clientele that comes back year after year after year. A guide is a friend. It's a teacher. It's a relationship, and having trust with them. Like my dad and I and my brother, we've been going with these guys down in Point Judith, almost every summer for like 6 years. And we do an annual trip. We go offshore, we catch some tuna, we come back, we learn some things, and that right there has kind of expedited my knowledge in terms of fishing here in Rhode Island, even though I live here and I'm a captain. I'm constantly out here, but I don't get to fish every day. These guys do. So why wouldn't I go to the experts and be like, hey, let me pick your brain for a little bit. Let me just go on a trip. And I'm not going to like steal your spot or anything. I just want to know, like, what's the best way to catch a tog in March versus October, because they feed differently. So I think having a guide and going to somewhere else and getting that guided trip is a great way to just kind of like a cheat code,
Yeah. I think that's so important with everything, is knowing that there's always going to be another level. Once you think that you've ascended to the point where you are the best writer, you're the best podcaster, you're the best guide, you're the best hunter, you just totally miss out, because you can be running your program and not even know that there's something else out there.
Yeah.
That can be, I don't know, the stuff of like a midlife crisis where all of a sudden you thought that there was nowhere to go. And all of a sudden you realize that you've been hanging out in the foothills. Like there's so much more to go out and see. But I think that does take a certain attitude to be able to kind of be humble and know that there's more work and other people are going to have better ideas, better ways. And you have to say, oh, well, that's a good idea. Maybe I should change my mind or change my path a little bit.
Yeah. That white belt mentality. That constantly be learning constantly. And I think teachers, so my mom was a teacher for 20 years. And I think I really got a lot of that from her, is just having that mentality to be like, I don't know everything, but if I don't know something, I'm going to go ask someone. I'm going to go ask a question, and maybe I'll get the answer, maybe not, or maybe I'll just change my perspective a little bit, whether it be good or for bad. But I think the best teachers are the ones that ask the most questions and are genuinely curious, rather than just thinking they know it all because they read it in a textbook. Because there's a lot of different books out there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a big difference too between knowing all the materials and being able to get the kids to buy into those materials. Like
well, that too.
I might love this book, but if the kids hate it, I got to take that into consideration. And how can I take this book that kids typically hate and find the angle that's going to help them learn from it? But,
right.
Yeah.
It's like that entertainment factor. You gotta be an entertainer as much as a teacher.
Yeah. And even if they don't get a great grade in the class, maybe they might still hate writing and reading, but they may have accidentally learned something. And that's kind of the goal for some of the kids.
Yeah. No, I can totally see that. I've never really been, I've taught like boating lessons and, just people in the gym and whatnot, but never anything really formally. But it's all about, you gotta be good at explaining it, but at the same time, you gotta make it fun. Otherwise no one wants to do it.
Yeah. However, learning how to dock is not super fun. The consequence is a little different. It's a matter of editing the paper. I had a 15-foot Boston whaler And I sold that and upgraded to a 21-foot aluminum boat, which has a, extended transom. It's got the motor. So there's so much more going on there. And when I come into my slip, I've got, it's not like a uniform slip. There's a big rock, and then there's some smaller rental boats. So I got to come in and I have to totally change my momentum to get into, and oh man, I take the deep breath and, just talking to myself. And if there's a little bit of wind, I just kind of get blown off it. And so docking by myself is kind of tough. With the whaler, I could just, reach out, but with this covered cabin, I got to kind of take my line and then run to the back. And oh man, it's crazy. But the buddy of mine said, dude, don't even worry about it. It's bumper boats out here. Like everyone just gets, I think getting over that kind of helped me relax a little bit and think, all right, no one is coming in perfectly at all. Right. Especially the people who are renting boats that come up to Alaska, and they're crashing all over. So I think just getting over that and learning that, but I can't imagine teaching someone how to dock and keeping them calm, because it's such a stressful thing.
It's definitely it's funny because all of a sudden we'll be out there and, I'll bring it in and they'll bring it, like they'll take the helm for a little bit. And then when we start to get in the dock, you can see the stress level just start to rise. And all of a sudden it's always at the worst moment possible where the reaction is hands off the wheel, hands off the throttle, and they're like stepping away, right? Because it's just too much. And that's the worst thing to do, right? Because now no one has control of the boat for a brief moment. And I always step in and, grab it and kind of back out. But I think the best thing that I kind of learned when teaching people is just, you got to be calm, you got to be cool, and you got to be collected the whole time. Like if they're starting to mess up, you'd be like, okay, no problem. We'll get you out of the dock. Like, it's not a big deal, and just kind of giving it perspective. Like, okay, if you hit the dock doing half a knot or a knot, and the dock's probably made out of wood. So wood is soft. It's not going to really hurt you. If you scuff up the boat, that's okay. We got a buffer. We can buff it out. Like, it's not a huge deal. As long as you're not smashing into someone's anchor pulpit or destroying fiberglass, then what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Like, who cares? You got a buffer, buff it out. You got a scuff, rub it off with your finger. Like, not a big deal. Now, with that said, working for the towing and salvage company, I have to dock boats all day, every day, most of the time with another boat attached to me, various sizes, wind, current. But it's that same mentality. It's like, you got to think 2 steps ahead, and when you're on step 2, you're like 4 steps ahead because you're trying to gauge everything. And the best thing I can say is, just like your friend said, it's bumper boats. Like, no one's really judging you. I mean, some people will, but who cares about those people anyway?
Yeah. I think that there's the perception that there's always going to be someone there with a cell phone out camera waiting for you to dock, but most people just don't care. You come in, they're just, as they're walking by, they'll help push your bow out a little bit or grab a line or something like that, or ask. And like, that's just standard. That's not even a big deal. So I think over that has been big. But
the boating community is a cool group of people for the most part.
Yeah,
it seems like,
Yeah. But well, coming up on an hour here. What do you got for like a closer, and then where people can find you and all that stuff?
Oh man, a closer. I mean, I guess throughout this whole process, what I've found, and listening to the recent podcast with Cody and Danny, and they're like eons ahead of me, is just try and be patient is what I have found, and I usually suck at that, but I think we all in some regard, do to some extent. So that's kind of been, just staying patient, trying to stay the course and keep on moving on. When opportunities arise, try and take them. And if they work out, great. If they don't, then it was probably meant to be. That's kind of been my approach so far, is like, if it doesn't work out, then it probably wasn't meant to be, unless there's like unforeseen circumstances that, you inadvertently got yourself into and kind of force that opportunity away. But yeah. And if you want to learn more about what I'm doing, you can find me on Instagram. I don't really use my personal account all that much. I'll usually throw a story of me up on the water. It's at Captain_Zachariah_Rollins. And then along the keel is the podcast. If you want to check that out, that'd be awesome. And that's just at Along the Keel on Instagram. And then check us out on the website, sign up for the newsletter, and Waypoint TV. Check us out there at Waypoint TV. So yeah, that's about it.
Perfect. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. Talk to you soon.
See ya.